Hello and welcome to Hippie Hyena, the SJW 3 Minutes of Hate. And today we are looking at the sister of one of our previous targets, Abigail Shapiro, otherwise known as Classical Abby. She's got her own YouTube channel now that she's been astroturfing and relentlessly pushing through adverts onto everyone's feed, driving everyone completely up the wall. So we'll have a little look and see if she's got any content behind this. Beyond just conservative drivel.
Hello, beautiful ladies.
Hey, don't misgender me. I'll take that as a compliment.
And welcome to today's video, where we're going to be talking about how to avoid being peer pressured about being conservative. I want to preface this video by saying that this isn't about talking to your friends and listening to them and hearing arguments from the other side and not allowing yourself to actually listen.
Well, the thing is, we can already tell specifically, Abby, that you don't listen to the other point of view, or at least take it on board with any kind of critical degree of thought. Because if you did any of that, you wouldn't be a conservative.
This is about being peer pressured about your views because people call you a bad person for having them.
Well, there are two reasons you can actually be a bad person. And that's basically your behaviour, or it's your thoughts, your views. Your views can make you a bad person if you have really bad views. Like, for example, if you think that certain races are inferior to other races, that pretty much makes you a bad person. Just putting that out there as a kind of framing device on what we're about to see, because I think it's important to remember that bad views do in fact make you a bad person.
I think it's a wonderful and very important thing to have conversations with people across the aisle so that we can learn about other people's positions and all of that. So I do think it's important to engage with people on the other side, but if people are just going to demonize you or villainize you, I don't think that that's fair, and that would be considered, in my book, peer pressure.
Well, you know, I'm sure there are people, like probably Abby Shapiro and her brother, Ben Shapiro, and pretty much most of the right, who'd rather that political discussions took place in a sort of theoretical matrix, away from any ethical consequences. But the thing is, politics has a direct effect on people's lives. If you make people pay for healthcare, for example, it means that the people who can't afford it will die for the crime of not being as wealthy as you are. And in a sense, if you support that policy, you are to a certain extent responsible for that person's death. Now, under normal circumstances, when somebody is responsible for other people's deaths, as long as it's not a war situation, the general public generally frown upon that. Generally, the general public want to cast that person out, call them a bad person, because that is specifically what they are. And you don't get to get away with those behaviours consequence-free just because you're pushing your immoral actions away from you using the tool of politics. The distance doesn't make it any less immoral or any less abhorrent to genuine people. So when you're pressing these abhorrent, disgusting views, you've got to expect some kind of ethical pushback. You've got to expect people telling you this makes you a bad person, because it cannot be separated. It does make you a bad person, and that's not a consequence that you can escape just because you say or label it as peer pressure or just being uncivil or unkind. You're being uncivil or unkind by your actions leading to the deaths of hundreds and thousands of people. And that's just the deaths. In terms of the suffering, it's in millions or billions of people. Yet every time you vote, you're contributing to that. So of course, we're going to call you a bad person. And you don't get to escape the consequences of your bad behaviour.
So I have a whole list of ways that you can protect yourself from being peer pressured by people who have different views than you do and who are making you feel bad about your conservative views. So let's get into it. The first thing to do is to arm yourself with the arguments. Every view you hold and have should have a basis and a foundation for why you believe it.
Oh dear, and right off the bat, it's a fail. If you did have any factual basis for what you were pressing, you wouldn't be a conservative, because there are no facts on your side. This is what makes it specifically difficult to be a conservative. That, you espouse things that other people find abhorrent and disgusting, and you also have no basis for believing in those things anyway. But yeah, I would absolutely love to see this attempted. This would be great if conservatives did try and argue on a sort of factual basis. It would be just awesome to see them humiliated. Because I'm a cruel person and I enjoy conservatives being humiliated. I mean, who doesn't? And you know what? If they did try and argue in a factual way, it would probably lead to there being far less conservatives. Because this peer pressure, in inverted commas, that they're talking about, is in fact people just telling them they're wrong and disgusting and why. And perhaps if they listened to that a little bit more and really took it on board, they'd be able to grow as a person. But I think in a strange way, I have to support Abby on this. Please do try and present some kind of factual basis for your bizarre and completely insane perspectives. Because usually, all you do is talk about common sense, which just means some bullshit you feel.
Now, of course, your parents and the people that you trust have those views for a reason. So it's good to listen to them and hear why they think those things. But it's also really important to have those arguments and understand them for yourself. You shouldn't just willy-nilly agree to whatever anyone says who is someone that you treat as a role model. You really should take the time and take your time to learn and understand those arguments before going out into the real world and being faced with different ones.
I mean, it's just a contradiction in terms. If you really understood the arguments, you wouldn't be trying to espouse the positions that you're in. But you'll notice what's kind of interesting is she's never at any point coming from the perspective of you look at the evidence and then form your opinions out of that. She's talking about you've got these opinions and then search out for information that appears to back them up. It's a very important distinction because what that is archetypal confirmation bias. It's not just accidental confirmation bias, it's deliberate, methodical confirmation bias.
Because the thing is, news and facts will always be skewed one way or the other, and so it's always important to understand both sides. So when somebody starts saying that you're a bad person for having conservative beliefs and starts just spewing media facts at you, which have been skewed in a certain direction and are made for a certain position, you actually have an understanding of those statistics and understand how they've been skewed, because usually statistics can be used to prove a point.
Fundamentally anti-science. She's deliberately instructing people to basically ignore facts, because facts apparently skewed in a particular direction. And it's no accident that conservatives feel that facts are skewed against them, because I think all you need to do is take out the word skewed in that and you get something closer to reality, that facts are against them.
It's always important to know what the other side is saying, so when they try to villainize you or demonize you, you actually are prepared. You've heard it before, you know what the response should be, and you're not totally taken off guard. And then in a situation where you are being peer pressured, where someone is telling you you're a bad person for being conservative, you can actually take a moment and respond.
Now this is fascinating, because what it actually is attempting to convert a human being with a mind that apparently can think independently and convert them into a kind of NPC dialogue tree. This is why so often when you're speaking with conservatives and you make a point, they'll start responding as if you made a completely different point than the one you did. And not necessarily just because they're straw manning you. What's actually happening there is that they are struggling to fit you into the lanes of their dialogue tree. And when you've spoken something outside of it, they don't really have any way to deal with it. And this is essentially what she's advising people do. They try and memorize a bunch of left-wing talking points and then memorize a bunch of responses that have been pre-scripted by right-wing demagogues like her brother. And in this way, they don't actually have to think about anything that's happening. It's more like a kind of vaccine against the infection of rational thought. And that is, at the end of the day, the purpose of this. The purpose of avoiding this peer pressure, or coping with it, or however you want to put it, is actually to inoculate the brainwashed against possible threats to that brainwashing.
So it's really important to stay friends with the people who actually want to have these conversations and who aren't going to villainize you for having those opinions that are different from their own. And I think you can have a lot of different kinds of friends. You should have friends who are conservatives. You should have friends who are liberals. You just shouldn't have friends who think you're a bad person for being conservative.
The thing is, if you have friends that are nominally left-wing, like liberals, I don't really consider them left-wing, but they sometimes say that they're left-wing themselves. If you have friends like that don't consider you evil for being conservative, don't consider that it makes you a bad person, then they're people who haven't really understood the issue. They're people who have a very shallow understanding of politics. And if you eradicate from your friendship group anyone who does have a deep understanding of politics, then that will also protect you from having to face the inherent unpleasantness of the views that you hold. And in some cases, it's facing that inherent unpleasantness that leads to growth. And it's specifically that growth that people like Abby Shapiro are frightened of themselves and others acquiring.
You will find that bolstering your views instead of giving into peer pressure when somebody calls you a bad person will also give you much more integrity.
Integrity. That is the one word that I truly associate with the right wing. Integrity. What an absolute joke. Essentially, this peer pressure argument, or this peer pressure subject amongst conservatives is basically they're just asking for a safe space, a hug box where they don't have to face any consequences for their abhorrent views and actions. And failing that, they're trying to create a kind of internal hug box via things like constructing a dialogue tree or thought-stopping techniques. Because at the end of the day, they realise that their deplorable bullshit just can't really face up to any form of scrutiny, especially not ethical or moral scrutiny.